Kyler, who should present?
Do it.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to be doing the space race portion, and Kyler is going to be doing the the arms race portion. So this is the space race and the arms race by Kyler L. and Ian W. The space race is an event that started due to the Cold War, and the space war started in the late 1950s. Since an important aspect of the Cold War was propaganda, the space race would be important to prove which country had the best science, technology, and economic system. And being the first country to send someone to the moon would also be great for propaganda. Another major reason why the space race is important today is because it led to significant developments in the fields, including telecommunications, which is just long-distance communications, microtechnology, which is important for just about every electronic, computer science, rocket technology for missiles and other war-related projectiles, as well as like space rockets and solar power. It even is the main reason for something that most people couldn't live without today, GPS. In other words, many important advances in technology today likely would not have been made without the space race. Even today, people are still influenced by the space race because it sparked an increase in astronomy, and it's a primary reason why NASA was created to, quote, pioneer the future in space exploration, scientific discovery, and aeronautics research. Next slide. The space race mainly started because the Soviet Union launched the world's first satellite called Sputnik 1 in 1957, and it was using it. The Soviet Union was using it to prove their superior technology. This act was what started the space race, and it relates to the Cold War because the U.S. was worried that the Soviet Union would use their dominance in space for military purposes, and the U.S. couldn't allow that. They launched the Explorer 1 in 1958, and from that point, the space race was on. Furthermore, since an important aspect of the Cold War was propaganda, the end result of the space race, as I said in the previous slide, would prove whether the US or the Soviet Union had the superior science and technology, as well as the best economic system. In short, the space race is related to the Cold War because it started when the USSR launched a satellite because of the Cold War, and the US launched a satellite in retaliation, causing the space war to take place. Next slide. All right. As I said in the last slide, again, the beginning of the space race started with the launch of Sputnik 1. It was launched as a way to shock the scientific experts and citizens in the United States, who had hoped for a while that the United States would accomplish this milestone first. It also worried the U.S. military because they thought that the Soviet Union would use their dominance in space for military purposes. The launch of Sputnik also proved, although the USSR didn't explicitly state this, that the U.S. military had fallen behind in developing new technology and were losing the Cold War. In the long run, Sputnik 1 intensified the arms race and raised Cold War tensions. After Sputnik 1 was launched, the U.S. created their own satellite, the Explorer 1, and launched it in 1958. Later, in October of 1958, the U.S. created NASA with the goal of getting the first human into space, which would restore the U.S.'s dominance. After NASA was created, they put 508 military pilots through rigorous tests, and the 7 remaining pilots at the end of the tests would be given the opportunity to become the first astronauts. Unfortunately for the U.S., on April 12, 1961, the Soviet Union launched the first astronaut ever, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit. He circled Earth in 108 minutes and safely landed. This caused NASA to send astronaut Alan Shepard into space. His 15-minute suborbital, not in space, flight didn't impress the Soviets. However, the purpose of launching Alan Shepard into space wasn't to prove that the U.S. was winning the race. No, it was to prove that the Americans could still catch up and win the space race. Next slide. 1 year after Alan Shepard's launch, John Glenn, the backup astronaut for both Shepard and Grissom, was slated to fly someday in January 1962. His one mission was to circle Earth, and if Glenn was successful, he would be the first American to fully orbit Earth. Furthermore, if he was successful, the Americans would likely be able to send warheads anywhere on the planet, like the USSR. He named his ship the Friendship 7, ironic, I know, because he wanted to send a message of friendship to everywhere in the world. On February 20th, 1962, John Glenn became the first American to ever orbit the entire Earth successfully. This was a monumental moment in the space war, as the Americans had officially become competitors after a year of preparation. Hundreds of thousands of Americans lined the streets of Washington, D.C. and New York City to cheer for, congratulate, and applaud John Glenn. Congress awarded him the Medal of Honor, which is the highest military award possible. After both the US and USSR had astronaut casualties later, both countries halted flights for a year to ensure safety. Then, NASA scheduled Apollo 11 as the first manned mission to the moon, and in January 1969, Neil Armstrong, Edwin Aldrin, and Michael Collins became the three men to partake in the Apollo 11 mission. On July 16, 1969, the three-man crew and Apollo 11 were ready for liftoff. Furthermore, because the Soviet rocket had blown up weeks beforehand, if the Apollo 11 mission went smoothly, the US would be the first country to have people land on the moon. Next slide. After Apollo 11 was launched, here's a short summary of what happened. The three astronauts successfully went to space and landed on the moon, where Neil Armstrong famously said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," after he landed on the moon. Then they went back to Earth with no exceptionally major problems, although there was one when they were trying to land on the moon and this error code came up on their computer, and back at the command center, they just decided to let them land on the moon, even though they didn't really know what the message meant. After Apollo 11, there were 5 more Apollo missions that occurred. The most disastrous one was easily Apollo 13, where an explosion in one of the few oxygen tanks made it so that Apollo 13 would have to orbit the moon and re-enter Earth without landing once. If you watched the Apollo 13 movie, which I did, you know how many times the men almost died. But thanks to mission control and some ingenuity, the 3 astronauts on Apollo 13 survived. After that point, the US's rocket technology rocketed, get it, past the USSR's technologies. In July of 1975, the relationships between the US and Soviet Union were beginning to soften, and the first USSR-US space mission, called the Apollo-Soyuz project, occurred, where an American spacecraft docked with a USSR spacecraft. After this, the space race was widely considered to be officially over. Even though the USSR had a head start in the race, the US had pulled out a comeback and won the space race for once and for all.
What was the arms race? During the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union became engaged in a nuclear arms race. An arms race occurs when two nations compete for an increase of military power. During the Cold War, the US and the USSR competed against each other in a nuclear arms race. So this means the US and the USSR were competing for a superior nuclear arsenal. Motivations for the arms race. The arms race was mainly driven by the motivation of fear. Neither country wanted to be controlled, occupied, or enslaved by the other. Both countries did everything they possibly could to be the stronger country, and the US went to the point where most of their money was being spent on military. Whichever country was weaker, that country would have less freedom and would always be under the influence of the superior country. The fear of losing peace. Yep, that's right. They're keeping peace with
wanted research on that, then come back next week and tell us what you find.
I'll make a note of that, sure.
Yeah, you will find something really interesting.
Okay, so the US, how many times the US landed on the moon?
Man, US people landed on the moon.
How many US people landed
Yeah.
on the moon? Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Kyler is back.
Yeah. I lost internet again.
No worries.
So I just continue, right?
Yeah, please. I think you stopped that one slide before.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, so the fear of losing peace. Yes, they are keeping peace with a contest of who has a better military. Whichever country shows signs of weaknesses with an inferior military first will most likely be punished when the other side takes advantage of their inferiority. The fear of losing control of both internationally and domestically of their own economy, military, and more. The fear of the other side breaching trust. Both countries must be prepared in case one of them want to attack. One big motivational evidence that we've observed from the nuclear arms race was the very reason that effectively ended the Second World War, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So initially, the U.S. was the first country to develop an atomic bomb, and they were the only ones to have an atomic bomb. However, 4 years later, when the Soviets successfully tested their first atomic bomb, both countries started investing massive resources into building more and more powerful weapons and stockpiling a nuclear arsenal. Then in 1952, the US tested an even bigger, more powerful bomb, the thermonuclear bomb, or the hydrogen bomb. The Soviet Union quickly followed up to this and tested their first megaton range hydrogen bomb, the RDS 37 bomb, 3 years later in 1955. Then in 1961, the Soviet Union came back again, following up their initial achievement, and tested the most powerful bomb ever detonated, even today, the Tsar Bomba. This bomb remains the most powerful bomb to be tested by far. It has an unbelievable 50 megaton yield. A 1 megaton bomb would completely annihilate almost 130 kilometers squared worth of 130 square kilometers worth of land, and the largest U.S. bomb ever created was the B-41, with a maximum yield of just half of what the Soviets had. The most powerful bomb in service with the US today is the B-83, with only 1.2 megatons, barely in the megaton range. According to some studies, the Tsar Bomba's maximum yield was equivalent to around 10 times the total ordnance dropped during the entirety of World War II, which is just mind-blowing. It's easy to see how two countries got tangled up in this arms race, trying to build a better military and not let the other one win. So the impacts of the arms race. With both the US and the USSR spending billions and billions of dollars on developing weapons, had a large arsenal, and to get a larger arsenal of them, their economies were both impacted. This caused a huge impact to the Soviet Union as their economy was completely shattered in World War II, and the arms race took place immediately after World War II. The arms race caused tension levels between the US and the USSR to greatly increase. Some studies also find that an arms race could increase the probability of a war between the two competitors. And it got to the point where the US had B-52 Stratofortress bombers in the air on standby 24/7, armed with nuclear weapons, ready to be the first responders. There was never a time where there weren't B-52s in the air. Everybody was on extremely high alert, and the stress levels were through the roof. The arms race dramatically increased the number of nuclear warheads globally. Other countries can't just sit there while the US and USSR are building huge stockpiles of nuclear weapons. They're going to stockpile their own too. The increase of global tension. The arms race caused many Americans to fear nuclear war would happen at any moment, while other countries in the world were also preparing for a nuclear war. With so many countries adding nuclear weapons to their inventory, basically anybody could have started a war that could pretty much make Earth's surface to be inhabitable to us for centuries to come. How the arms race impacted today's militaries. Many militaries around the world now can pretty much destroy the face of the planet several times over if necessary. The next all-out war would truly be the war to end all wars, or at least it'll wipe out a lot of the human race. The next war would most likely be a war about technologies, for example, a space war. They would target satellites, and if satellites are destroyed, there would be no GPS, no telecommunication. Satellite missile targeting systems would be completely available. Navigation would be very difficult, and our lifestyle in general would basically be set back an entire century. It doesn't stop just there, though. We can't recover as easily as it sounds on the surface. With the amount of satellites that are orbiting the Earth right now, if even half of them are destroyed, the debris from the destroyed satellites alone would create a domino effect that would possibly destroy many other satellites. And with the amount of orbiting debris traveling at several times the speed of sound, at least, there would be a net or a prison created for us so that we can't go into space at all without somehow cleaning this debris up. A space war would probably take the ability away for any space travel from us for at least a few decades, maybe even centuries. Even launching a new satellite would most likely not be an option due to the amount of orbital debris. We would possibly lose the Earth with another war, with another all-out war. Current wars are more driven by economy. Civilians are now possibly benefited from migrating to Mars. So the conclusion. Thanks to the arms race, people realize that future wars may very well destroy the entire planet for us. Thanks to the space race, we can clearly easily communicate. We have the internet, we have much of today's life being shaped thanks to the space race. However, the space race is also responsible for a massive potential trap or prison for humanity, space debris. This prison's grand opening will be the moment someone starts another large-scale war. So, in conclusion, people need to realize that instead of each individual country fighting each other for a temporary survival on this planet, they should instead cooperate with each other for a long-term presence in this galaxy. And here are some sources, I guess. Yeah, so that's it.